Okay, so this is a nice review of what you did on your quiz yesterday. So let's review this. I have to find two numbers that multiply to what in the first one? 9 and add to what? 6. Okay, what two numbers multiply to 9 and add to 6? Austin? 3 and? Good. Those are my two numbers. Now, what could I do here? What type of trinomial is this? Is this simple or is it one of our trickier ones? Nick? Why is it simple? Yeah, there's no number here, so what's my answer? Good. Is there another way I could have written this? Did anyone else write that a little bit differently? Austin? X plus 3 all squared. Do you know why we can write it as x plus 3 all squared? These are both the same thing. So I can just write it to the power of 2. Okay, what about this one? This is one of our tricky ones. So I have to find two numbers that multiply to what? Thank you, Zach. And add to, Austin, 10. What two numbers multiply to 25 and add to 10? 5 and 5. Okay, now I can't just put x plus 5 in the brackets. What do I have to do here? I figured out my product sum, that's my PS step. My next step is I have to decompose that middle term. What'd they say? Okay. They decompose the middle term. So I take my first term stays the same, 25x squared. Instead of writing plus 10x, what do I write? Robbie? Good? Plus 1. Okay, so I've just taken my two factors, wrote it down up with what's in the middle. So that was my decompose the middle term. Now I group. I group the first two terms, I group the last two terms. What can I common factor out of this first group here? Sarah? Good, and what am I left with? Excellent. And then what about this last group here? Is there anything I can factor out? Robbie? Good, plus 1. So I'm left with 5x plus 1. What's my final step going to be here? Austin? 5x plus 1. Factor out the binomial. I'm left with 5x plus 1, which leaves me with 5x plus 1 all squared. Okay, a lot of work, right? A little bit of work? There's going to be a trick today that I'm going to show you that you'll be able to go from this first step to this last step without having to do decomposition. There's a special trick. These ones are special because both binomials are the same. And we call this a perfect trinomial. So your learning goal today is to factor a perfect trinomial. So it's pretty straightforward. Factoring a perfect square, a trinomial, results in binomials. Each bracket will be the same, which we just figured out. The difference is that both the first and last terms are perfect squares, and the middle term is 2 times the square root of the first term times the square root of the last term. Okay, so how do you know when, or there's going to be a trick here, okay? And to do this, I have these steps. It says take the square root of the first term. What's my square root of the first term? What's the square root of a squared? Does anyone know? Austin? It's just a. And actually, it's here. There's a 1 here. If you put in your calculator the square root of 1, you'll get So if I would take the square root of 1a squared, I get just 1a. If I take the square root of 16, what do I get? Austin? 4? Okay, now you have to do a check. Here's what your check is. The square root of the first term, which is this part here, 1a. I'm going to multiply that by 2, then multiply it by the square root of this last term, and see what do I get. 1a times 2 gives me 2a. 2a times 4 gives me 8a. That is my middle term. So this is a perfect trinomial, my perfect square trinomial. So what I can do here, because if this was not 8a, I'd have a problem. I can't do this little trick. So this is our check that we have to do. So now that I've checked, I'm going to create a bracket. Whatever this part here is, whatever I take the square root of the first term is, I'm going to put it here. So a. Then I take this sign, because there's a minus sign in the middle, I'm going to carry that minus sign down. Then I take the square root of the last term, which is 4, and I square it. That's it. Instead of doing decomposition, that's all I have to do. Take the square root of the first term, which is 1a, put it in the bracket. Take the square root of the last term, which is 4, put it in the bracket, carry down the sign in the middle. Now, pardon? This is our trick. You missed the first part. Okay? If I were to do decomposition, I would have gotten a minus 4, a minus 4. Okay, so I can just go to this step. Now you have to know when to do it, and this is why this work up here on the top is important, because you have to check, is it actually a perfect square trinomial? And if your middle term is this 8a, which we calculated, then you're good to go. So I'm going to do this first one. Okay, I have to check. Can I use my trick? So right away you should be saying perfect numbers. 25 is a perfect number because I can take the square root of that. 16, I can take the square root of. Okay, so I'm looking good. If I take the square root of this first term, what do I get? Ben? 5 what? Good. If I take the square root of this last term, what do I get? What do I get? The square root of the last term. Vanessa? 4b? Okay, now here comes my check. I take this answer here, 5a, times 2, times 4b. What do I get? 5 times 2 gives me 10. 10 times 4 gives me 40ab. So that is my middle term. So now this becomes super easy. Instead of doing decomposition with these crazy looking numbers, I can just write this as bracket 5a, carry down the sign here, minus 4b, all squared. Does anyone have any questions about what I just did? Okay, let's try this next one here. Okay, 144, is that a perfect square? Is 1 a perfect square? Yes. So then we check. Okay, if I take the square root of this first term, the square root of 144 gives me what, Austin? 12x. The square root of 1, what does that give me? 1. So then I take here 12x times 2 times 1 gives me what? 24x. So yes, I can use this trick. Can someone tell me what would I put for my final answer? How would I factor this? What would I put inside those brackets there? Nathan? 12x minus 1 squared. Perfect. Okay, let's go to this third example here. Is 8, can I take the square root of 8? No? We get a decimal. Can I take the square root of 162? No, I get a decimal. But what do you notice about these three numbers here? What do you notice? What's something that we can do? What can I factor? Pardon? Is there a common factor there? If you don't have a calculator and you need one, can you please come get one? Sarah? Yes, the common factor is 2. I would have probably started with 8. Can I divide 8 by all of these terms? Well, I could divide 8 into 72. Can't do it to 162. So 8 isn't it? I could do 4. 4 goes into 72, but not 162. So then I go even further. Can I factor out a 2? Yes, I can. What am I left with when I factor out a 2? When I common factor out that 2, what will be left? Nick? Plus what? Did you get a late slip? Okay. Okay. So I common factored out that 2. If I didn't common factor out that 2, I'd be working with some pretty crazy numbers where I have to find the product sum of those numbers. So it's always good to common factor out when they're really, really large numbers. Now, if I look, 4 is a perfect number. 81 is that perfect square number. So let's check if I can use this trick. If I take the square root of 4z squared, what am I left with? 2z. If I take the square root of 81, what am I left with? 9. So then now I have to do my check. 2 times 2 times 9 gives me what? Check with your calculators, please. What does that give me? Okay, so look at that. That's my middle term. Life is wonderful. I can use this to come up with my next answer. Can someone who I haven't heard from tell me what would I write on my next line for my last answer or for my final answer? Robbie? 2 what? What? I can't forget about this 2 out here. So I got to carry it down. So then I go 2z. Keep going. Plus 9 all squared. Why did I put a positive sign in the middle there? I did carry it down. If I looked up here, there was a positive sign here. So it must be a positive sign inside that binomial. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay, I want you to try this one on your desk. I want to see the check step. Can you factor this? I didn't go to check my mailbox today. Okay. Okay. She's wonderful. I love her. I could always use. I have about 4 kids. So I'll get to know a lot better after this test. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Okay, good. Okay, that's awesome. Thanks. Okay, so what did you notice about this example? What did you notice about this example? Austin? Okay, so this is why you check. If I were to take the square root of the first term, what do I get? 10z. If I take the square root of the last term, what would I get? 11. So what do I need to do here to check to see if I can use this trick, Nick? Okay? Yes. You want to know what? The good clue for a test is the mark allocations. So a question, not like this, a question, let's say like this, it will be worth 1 mark. A question like this will be worth 1 mark. This one would be worth 2 because you'd have to come and factor out. A decomposition question is worth 4 marks. Will I say it's a perfect trinomial? I'll just give it to you, but if you use decomposition for all of them, if you do that, that's fine. Like, I won't mark it wrong. It's only worth 1 mark and you're doing 4 steps. It's quicker if you notice this. Okay? Okay, what's the answer, Nick? Okay, which is what? What does this give me? 220. What's my middle term there say? 228. Can I use this trick? No, I cannot. So you would have to factor this using decomposition if it's even possible. So this middle term would have had to have been 220, which, yes, I do think that that was a typo in my note. It was supposed to be 220. So now we're going to pretend that that was 220. What would my answer be here? What would it be? What would that be? Robbie? Good. Does anyone have any questions about this?